Mikhail Tal was one of the famous grandmasters in his era, and he used to play a lot of games where he would sacrifice his material and then dominate and destroy the opponent despite sacrificing. Now, he here was playing against Viswanathan Anand, who is also India's famous grandmaster, and this game is a true example of how two strong GMs fought it out. And this was in 1989, so long back from now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's begin. Hey chess lovers, welcome back to the Chessyard. This is Bagga, and let me take you through this game, which starts off with c4, the English opening from Mikhail Tal. Anand responds with c5, symmetrical variation because both are playing symmetrically. Both have placed the same pawn up ahead. Here comes a knight to f3 by Tal, and Anand here responds with knight to c6. Knight to c6 is again fighting for the center, just like the opponent's knight is. So standard opening. Here comes a knight to c3. So both the knights are out by Mikhail Tal, and here Anand responds with a knight to d4, attacking the knight straight away, asking if Tal wants to take the knight. If that does happen, you can simply take back, and you have a present structure already. You can push e5 as well if, of course, the knight comes on to b5 to attack the pawn. You can kick the knight later on. You can put your knight out as well. Play pawn. Your pawn is already forward, so your bishop will be also willing to come out soon. So a nice structure that can happen for black. So immediately challenging the knight which was developed by placing the knight on to d4. Now here, Tal responds with e3 rather, attacking the knight and asking Anand to take because Anand has already moved the knight twice in the opening, and that would be the third time Anand will be moving it, which is bad. But Anand has to take. There's no other option. Going back is completely losing loss of tempo. So here, Tal takes with the queen, and now the queen is active, eyeing this diagonal towards the rook, and Anand is behind in development. That's why Tal has already gained an advantage of +1, and it's only move 5. But here Anand starts building up his own structure, castle, whatever you want to call it, from the king side now, playing g6 with the idea of fianchetto of the bishop, develop the knight, castle on the king side, and then launch an attack in the center. Here comes b3 by Tal, making sure that the bishop also is fianchetto here onto b2 so that both the bishops will be eyeing each other. Uh, that's what happens. Both the bishops have been now developed. Here comes a d6 now by Anand, with the idea of just simply solidifying the pawn here, opening up the diagonal of the bishop too. So it's a good move here. Again, normal development. G3 by Tal, maybe trying to put this bishop as well on this wonderful diagonal towards the rook. So Anand just responds quickly, plays rook to b8, making sure that there's no such threat later on as well in the game. Also, you have improved the position of the rook because you will not be castling on the queen side anyway, so that's fine. Now bishop to g2 by Tal, and here knight to h6 was played. Now you must be wondering why knight to h6 and why not knight to f6. Knight to f6 allows center pawn break as well immediately, and then what happens is you lose the control of the center. You will have to trade pawns, or if the opponent does, then also the center will be opened up on the opponent's terms. Remember, opponent can also castle kingside quickly, get the rook active, and your queen is in center. You don't want to give open files to the opponent. And if you play knight on to f6, most likely you will face this pawn move, and then it can be troublesome as well. Yes, you can always place bishop here, attacking the queen, but queen can be saved as well. So no such real threat here. So instead, in the game, Anand goes with knight to h6. Tal responds with queen to d1, again with the idea of not putting queen in danger, because if queen is stepping out of the comfort zone, it can be trapped. Wasn't going to be immediately, but why to take complications? So Tal just goes back with the queen, trying to play solid, and now preparing to castle. Here, Anand castles, and so does Tal. Here comes a bishop to d7, developing the bishop, and maybe now with the idea of putting it on to c6, eyeing this diagonal and trading off the light square bishop. A4 here played by Tal, just making sure that there is no pawn breaks happening. You are not pushing a b5 as well. Otherwise, b4 5 would have led to pawn trade, and bishop can take the pawn, either rook as well. But now bishop to c6, offering bishop exchange, which of course is denied, and d4 is played. Here Anand takes the bishop, Tal takes back with the king, and now not taking the pawn but defending it with the rook is another idea, so that rook lift is also possible. Here queen comes to d3, and now Anand takes. The point is now once you take, of course pawn can take back, but you will open up the e file as well, which is helpful later on. Now pawn takes, and now knight to f5 by Anand, attacking the pawn straight away, which is now attacked twice, and it's defended only once with the queen. So ideally, you should move the knight next, but here, Tal comes up with his own idea by placing the pawn forward. Again, a nice move, because rather than just moving away the knight and losing control of the squares, central squares, you push the pawn and let opponent take the knight if possible. You can simply trade off with the bishop, no harms. This bishop is nice. It's a defender of the king side. You don't want to lose a defender of your king side, so pawn forward makes more sense. But then here comes queen to b6 by Anand, attacking the pawn on to b3 as well. Also, this eyes the f2, which is important always if you try to create more pressure there. Uh, Here, knight goes back on to d1. The idea is to discover defense the pawn from the queen. So here bishop trades happen, and knight takes on to b2. But now the knight is passive. If you see, knight is only babysitting these pawns, not doing much. Earlier position of the knight was controlling the central squares, which is not the case anymore. So this trade was beneficial for black, and if you see, the game is now point 0.4 in favor of black here, as of now. Now comes e5, trying to go for a pawn break. Uh, Tal takes with Anpasan, and now f takes on e6, because there's no other option. Yes, the pawn break could have been avoided for some time more, but they wanted to. Anand actually wanted to have these couple of good connected center pawns, which are willing to be pushed later on in the game. All you have to do is put one of these rooks behind and simply push them. So here comes rook to d1, attacking the pawn, but it's saved quite comfortably right now, so not a threat. Anand goes with rook to f6, with the idea of maybe pushing this pawn further, so that this also adds up a layer of defense to the pawn. Now rook to d2, trying to maybe triple up on the d file is the idea. Here pawn forward is played as expected. E5. Now queen comes to d5. Tal sees an opening, so comes in with a check. King, of course, has to be moved. G7 is the best move as well, because then later on you have an escape square onto h6 as well, just in case. Here, Tal plays queen to b5, asking for queen trade, and now Anand can simply take, and the benefit is that you will have double pawns. But since Anand has a better position, he doesn't want to trade off queens as of now. Places queen onto c7, making sure that the queen has to retrieve to the square again and lose the tempo. But here Tal goes with c5, which is a mistake as well as per the computer, because now queen can simply take this pawn. And now if you trade off queens, you are pawn down, and that's a simple advantage that can be converted, especially at the GM level. So Tal understands that, doesn't trade off the queen now, but takes the b7 pawn. But what that does is allows Anand to play rook to c7, which not only again defends the pawn, which was well defended, comes in between the way of kings, saving the check, and attacks the queen with tempo. So now queen has to go back. So now queen goes to d5 rather, again asking for queen trade. And Anand declines it again. Queen to b4 now, attacking the pawn and the rook. But both are defended for now with the queen. But then idea is to place the rook maybe next onto c5, which will attack the queen, remove the defender of these two pieces so that only one will be defended eventually, and you can take the other. Here, rooks are doubled up onto D file by Tal, and now the same idea as we discussed: rook to C5, attacking the queen. Now, you might be thinking that queen can go back and still defend everything, but then again, rook comes in between, takes the pawn, and you are happy. So rather here, the best move as well is to place queen onto a8, threatening to take a pawn with check, maybe max, but you lose the pawn for the time being. b3 with queen takes. Now knight comes onto d3, attacking the rook. Now rook just moves up further, asking for rook trade here, Anand, but Tal denies and plays queen to e4 with the idea of whenever the knight moves, it will be a discovered attack on the rook as well. Couple of pieces will be attacking it. But here Anand simply gets back the rook onto c4, attacking the queen. So now queen again has to move. So many queen moves played by Tal, which are not in sync as of now in this game. And now queen to c3 by Anand, trying to pressurize further, moving it so that now the rook can simply move out of the way. There's no threats. The queen is not pinned. Here, rook comes to b2 by Tal, trying to maybe infiltrate into the situation, give a check maybe. But what happens next is rook comes to d4, which attacks the knight as well as the queen. And now the queen again has to be moved. But Tal first gives a check, and now h6, king to h6 is played by Anand, simply saving the king, not a threat. That's why moving the king to g7 was important rather than h8. Otherwise, you waste a couple of moves with the tempo. Couple of checks can be given. Now only one could have been, and you just slide your king up, no threats at all. Now queen to b5 by Tal here, trying to double up on the b file, saving the rook as well. From the rook as well, queen had to be saved. But now comes a knight to e3, and it's a fork. The problem is if you take, queen can simply give a check, and you are into the situation already. You cannot defend with the knight, because if you do, queen or rook either can take, and it's mate in 3 from there, mate in 2, as you see on the evaluation bar. uh, so you cannot defend it with the knight. And if you just say put your king back again, you lose the rook first, and everything crumbles one by one. It's a slow death, you can't do much about it, but it will mate very soon. From there on, it's again mate in 4. So that line doesn't work. So that's why this nice idea of giving a check with the knight, also it's a fork on the rook. So king gets saved, but here again, Anand doesn't go for the rook straight away, rather threatening to take this and then going for a checkmate attack from here as well. Tal tries to survive with the rook now onto f1, but now knight is captured with the rook, and you can't do much about the situation still. If you take again, it's bad, because firstly rook will be taken. Once you take back, rook comes down, and it's checkmate. So the checkmate doesn't look like that it can be saved right now. So here, in this position, he resigns, and it was game over. I hope you enjoyed this wonderful game. The only time both of these legends of the game played together, played against each other, and I hope there was something to be taken as a learning from this game as well. Thanks for your time, and if you did like the video, please do subscribe to the channel as well. And I shall see you tomorrow with some interesting and instructive content, like always. Take care. Bye bye.